Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's show. Guess what? I have
Hello,
company.
hello.
I have
We have
company.
full house.
Julie Anderson, Capri Carr, Sophie Marusic. You're watching the Wellbeing Intelligence Curriculum Faculty. Well, thank you, ladies, for joining me today. And, it is such an important time for us to have this conversation. So I'm going to give you each an opportunity to weigh in and do a little bit. But first, let me just introduce our show today because we have a really great topic. Welcome wherever you're joining us, Facebook, Instagram, um, where you're LinkedIn, wherever you're joining us, as well as YouTube. Thank you for being here and choosing to be with us. Today is February 1st, 2024, and we are doing this episode and we're focusing on responsible communication as a competency for well-being because there is nothing more frustrating than being ignored, overlooked, and being condescended to when you're trying to get your message across. So today we're going to focus on communication barrier, and importantly too, we're going especially around Black History Month, where we know that many people face these communication barriers because of other issues. So we'll be talking about that too. So thank you for being here. Let me welcome our guests. We'll start with you, Julie. Welcome to the show. Julie, tell us a little bit about what gets you excited about this topic, and of course, a little bit about you.
I love the topic because that's kind of going back to my roots where we started out the communication between the different personalities, the different cultures. So, as a brain lady, I always make that neuroscience connection and really gaining and understanding the connection between the wiring in your brain and the way you communicate. And and that's what I love about it. It's such an amazing topic is communication, and it's so important because the little things that um, little miscommunications can become huge issues, especially in a corporate wellness situation. So when we can improve and work on that, then we are able to overcome so much more.
All
And
right. Well, this is great to hear, and I love that you're sharing how it connects back with the work that you do in it with the brain because we communicate. We need our brain to communicate, so that's really cool. I'm going to bring on Dr. Gurpreet Kaur. Gurpreet, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Joyce. So, yes, I have a background in mental health and clinical psychology. So, I come from more of a wellness, well being, and mental health, mental wellness aspect. I work with individuals with counseling, coaching, and corporate training around mental wellness and well being.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to ask you though, what got you interested about our topic today? Communication barriers. What can the listeners look forward to? Why are you excited about this topic?
This topic particularly. Sure. What I feel when we are not mentally and emotionally well, our communication deteriorates. And communication is one of the biggest ways that we can let others know when you are struggling, right? So and it's important for us to assert our needs and what we need at work to even accomplish what we need to accomplish and in order to do what we need to do. But when hurdles like discrimination or kind of other things are put in place, and the communication kind of lags, that impacts our mental health. And then it kind of becomes a vicious cycle that if your mental health is compromised, then your work is compromised, and then the communication starts to deteriorate because your mental health is deteriorated. So it just becomes a vicious cycle. And what excites me about this topic is to not, first of all, prevention is the best medicine. So not to even get there and to get the symptoms and signs, red flags that, hey, I am heading that way. And to kind of put the brakes on and say, what do I need to do so I can brace myself? And if you find yourself being in that vicious cycle where you are struggling, and then we can look into some interventions and coping skills that you can incorporate to get out of that.
Excellent. We'll delve into that later. But first, let me bring up Miss Sylvia Maurice. Sylvia, good morning.
Good morning. It's nice to see you all.
Good, great, yes. So, what are you excited about for this topic?
Well, I'm excited that there's the possibility and hope of changing communication, because when I am in workplaces working with clients or leadership teams, it is always the number one problem that people cite as a problem at work, and it influences psychological safety, which is something that I'm very passionate about. It leads to people feeling like they're not included. It's a huge part of diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. And as a health coach, it is the number one problem I see when clients come to me with relationship issues. It's the number one problem in relationships. So there is so much room for us to grow. And I feel like it doesn't have to be complicated or complex or difficult. It's actually quite simple if we only understood some of the basics of communication and maybe understood it at a deeper level, more so than just, learning how to make eye contact and listen. It's much more than that, but it's also simpler than that. So there's so much room to grow here because we're pretty bad at it.
Oh, yeah, humans are. It's so interesting because we are, and we're all going to be on here and we're going to make this a really fun conversation, ladies. Thank you for doing that quick introduction about yourself and why you're passionate about this topic, because this is something all of us see, no matter where we are in our work and in our life. We're seeing people, even in our personal lives, communication is such a big issue, and we need to be able to communicate with each other, but there are barriers, and some of the barriers are psychological, some are even subconscious barriers too. So what are you hearing, what are you seeing? So I hear things like, wait, I'm experiencing communication barriers at work because I am being ignored in the board meeting. I am in the meeting and I shared something and nobody listened to me, but somebody else shared the same thing and then it was taken. Like, what the heck happened, Joyce?
Mhm.
Why is this happening to me? So how many of you have heard that? And
Yeah.
how do we overcome that? And I think that is one piece that we can focus on today.
If I may, Joyce, one of the things that I have seen a lot, that happens a lot when I'm working with corporate teams especially, is we have a tendency to communicate the way we feel it's natural for us, right? We just go on default. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not that it's bad or anything, right? It's just the way our brain is wired. It's the way we communicate to other people. The challenge is that based on brain wiring, based on gender preference, based on culture, the person that we are trying to communicate with can be completely different, right? A right brainer communicates different than a left brainer. An introvert communicates different than an extrovert. A person who has had trauma in their life may communicate completely different than someone who has not experienced that. So what we have to do is we have to take pause and stop and go, okay, wait a minute. How do they need to receive my message? My message, I want it to be heard. I need it to be heard. But I have to stop and think, how does that person need to receive the message so that they understand what I'm saying? Right. And I think that's one of the biggest things is we just automatically go, hey, Joyce, hey, Gurpreet, hey, Sylvia, this is what I need, blah, 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 blah. And we just spit it out, not stopping and thinking, how does Joyce, Sylvia, or Gurpreet need to receive that message? So we have to kind of train our brain to start thinking receiver, not sender.
I like that. And I think sometimes we humans, we think of ourselves first. Our brain is designed to think of me first, right? So we have to train ourselves to think of others. And I like that you're talking about training the brain. But there are also the visible and invisible aspects, because I love that we're having this conversation on February 1st, because we're entering into Black History Month. And I'm hearing a lot of requests. Joyce, we need you to do something on Black History Month. We need to break down barriers. We need to, and really, when you look at it, a lot of it goes back to communication, the way people communicate, and not realizing that we're not all on the same boat. Because I may be coming from a whole different worldview, and the way I express myself, I need to ask myself or ask you, what would be the best way to get this message to you? But you're in the staff meeting, and there is someone facilitating the meeting. So I think besides that, we also have to think about how we receive others, because there are cultural barriers that prevents us from receiving others as well. We won't hear certain things from certain people because we don't have an expectation that they have anything to offer to us. So we could just sometimes ignore people or not hear their message. And that may be something that we need to look at ourselves and say, you know what, we're in the staff meeting, everyone should have a turn. And can you reword that sentence? Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Can you expand on that thought? Because sometimes people need a little bit more coaching to be able to express themselves. So if you're a facilitator of a meeting, you're a supervisor, manager, team leader, you need to learn how to facilitate that conversation so people feel comfortable and safe to express themselves. And I know, Sylvia, you talked about safety before. So I'd love to hear you chime in here.
Well, I think, something that Julie said is really interesting. There's a really big difference that I see in organizations when, you have introverts or extroverts, or people who are good, strong communicators, and people who tend to under-communicate. And one thing I know about human behavior is that we make up what we don't know.
Yeah, assumptions.
We make it up, right? So what I don't know about you, because I haven't made it my business to get to know you, I make up based on bits and pieces of evidence that may actually not hang together and may not in any way shape who you are or inform anyone about who you are as my coworker. So I think it's, one of the things that sort of has to be a precursor to strong communication is actually taking the time to get to know people and creating a safe space for people to share who they are. And people don't always share by what they say. They often share by what they do. And I think it's really important to ask questions. But as a supervisor, you also have to be very careful about targeting or singling out people who, if you got to know your employees, you would know who these people are really not safe speaking up. They do not want to speak in a group. So you have to make it your business to find out more about those people and get to know them one-to-one. Like I've had experiences where I've worked with teams, and I ask repeatedly, does anybody have an opinion about this? Who can care about this? Do you have anything to add? And there will be one or two people in the room who will be silent and really not making a lot of eye contact. And when I approach them later,
They have a lot to say.
trying not to assume that they're disinterested.
Okay.
right? But we make assumptions about what we don't know.
Yeah, the audio is cutting out a bit though, Sylvia. Check that. Okay, Gurpreet, I'm going to put you up to share with us on that. Tell me a little bit about what your thoughts on that, because when we talk about this first part of the show, we're looking about understanding communication barriers, and so we're looking at the language, the psychological, the physical, the cultural aspects of those barriers and what they could look like. So share your thoughts.
Sure, Joyce. I think those are great points that Julie and Sylvia have covered. And on expanding on that, I would say a lot of the times when I am working with leaders, and there was one particularly just recently, a few months ago, and she was bringing up a similar scenario that you have brought up about being cut off in board meetings, and she is only or at the time when I was working with her, she was only 2 of the 10 board members in the room, so who were women, right? So when I worked with her, we had to first do the emotional regulation, right? She gets triggered and has a trauma-based response, right, when she is cut off. And that can be from various different situations and conditions in your life. But I would say if you recognize that you're being triggered and then emotionally you're thrown off, your communication is not going to be as strong. It's not going to be firm. It's not going to be assertive. And you're coming from a place of defense. And when you are coming from a place of defense, the other person kind of shuts down, right? They have to put up their offense as well. So when work with leaders, I ask them to see kind of where can we grow internally first, so that you're not triggered, and the events that happen externally, you're able to just observe them. I know it's much easier said than done, that you're just able to observe and not get engaged in it emotionally or triggered. And then your communication, when you are saying, hey, I have a point here, right? And that assertiveness and that firmness is communicated, and it's at a very different level versus you're trying to communicate when you are triggered or emotionally dysregulated. So I think communication can be very different in 2 scenarios.
I like that because there is an emotional aspect to all our communication, and we have to remember that we are more than our emotions, and sometimes we go into the emotion and all we express is, why aren't you listening to me? And instead of, I was wondering if there is another way that I could, express this, or if there's a concern. So we're not necessarily out of our emotions. We're so deep, delved so deep in it, and that can be a challenge. So I like that piece that we get to do that. One of the things that what I wanted to touch on briefly is the impact of communication barriers, because we touch on it a little, but I want to emphasize that these things really do impact people's self-esteem. We do a lot of work around that professional self-esteem. Sometimes it is this big because people have gone through so much of these abuses and being ignored, or not heard, or not taken seriously, that they feel so small as a human being and as a professional, that they're struggling. It is the mental, the emotional well-being that's part of it. And then the broader implications is that when I have a really creative idea, I am not going to share it because I don't feel safe to share it. I don't feel safe to be vulnerable in the organization because, and we know creativity, one person brings an idea and another person talks about it. And then as we start dialoguing on it, it expands, and that's how innovation works. So we need to be out of our own mind and connect with others to have creativity and innovation in the organization. And that stifles when we have a poor communication or we have barriers to communication. So it's important for us to really emphasize what that is. But as we look at overcoming those barriers, what are some tips, ideas? Julie, let's hear from you.
I think when it comes to that, it takes a lot of introspection, right? You really have to think. As Sylvia was talking, one of the things that popped into my mind, and something that you said as well, Joyce and Gurpreet, that we have unconscious biases, right? And so we have to really stop on our end and think, why are we reacting the way that we are? Or why are we uncomfortable saying something? And once we start to make those identification, we can start to identify, be aware of where the situation is coming from or what's causing the feelings. That's very helpful. And then the second thing is, Gurpreet really hit on it, right? When you are in that trauma cycle, when you are in the second your amygdala and all that high emotion kicks in, you lose the ability to think. The front part of your brain drops out, becomes very inactive. And that's where all your creative thinking and all the stuff goes on. So it's really important to stay very present. And when you feel yourself going there, just taking those deep breaths, getting the oxygen level back up to your brain, and really being very, very present. This is where mindfulness practice on a daily basis, right? So that you can, as soon as you feel yourself experiencing that anxiety, kicking in, taking the deep breaths, training yourself to re-engage and just be 100% present, not be worried about what other people are thinking because that's coming in the future or anything that happened in the past, right? But just be right now, and it's going to give you a stronger confidence to be able to take what you need to take.
I think that is so important that you're sharing that, and something I see as a conflict analyst, sometimes as a mediator facilitating high conflict situation. It's giving people that precursor to the conversation. And we cannot talk about communication barriers without talking about the importance of mentoring and coaching people, because not everyone has the gift of gab like us. We just open our mouth and things come out. Some people really need that encouragement. And when there is high emotions, they need that opportunity to sit back. Well, let's just pause and, you're in a mediation or facilitated discussion and somebody just spews something out. And instead of the other person reacting, you have to facilitate that dialogue to say, let's just pause and contemplate on that and how we want to respond. Because the way we respond is not necessarily, or even the way we want to respond, the way we should respond. Because the way we want to respond may be very emotional, and we need to get out of that and say, what would be the right response for this at this point in time? How do I communicate that this was rude, it was disrespectful, it makes me feel invisible, that I feel like I don't have a voice in the organization? How do I message that without attacking, without making others feel defensive? And that's one of the things we teach when we teach allyship, right? It's about partnering. It's about saying, why don't we work together to make this better? Not, oh, you did this and this person did this, and it's really getting out of the blame game and taking responsibility. And that's why we're doing responsible communication, is the competency we do in February. We're focusing on being responsible for the communication on both sides, not one party taking all the responsibility, but we both the sender and the receiver are now being more responsible in the way we communicate. Gurpreet and then Sylvia. Thoughts? Gurpreet, thoughts?
I mean,
Sylvia, you can pop in because I'm not hearing Gurpreet. I'm not quite sure what happened to him.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. I was trying to. Someone had posted a comment that they cannot focus or because of the background noise, and I was trying to kind of see if we can troubleshoot that. That it seems like somebody's
We have
fan.
background noise?
Yes, we can all hear that, and our listeners can hear it. Somebody had commented it. It looks like it's a fan or something. I was trying to focus on that. Joyce, would you like to, if you can repeat the question one more time for me, and then mute yourself, and we can kind of maybe diagnose that it's whose computer
Yes,
it's coming from.
absolutely.
Savia and I
Let's see
tried,
here.
and it was still there.
Okay, let's definitely look into that noise to see where it's coming from. So Gurpreet, I'm going to give you, we're talking about overcoming the communication barriers. So where are the communication barriers and how do we overcome them? And we're looking at things like self-awareness, empathy, all of those pieces. How do you overcome those barriers? And I'm going to mute myself and let me know if the noise stops.
Yes, thank you for the question again. I was trying to focus on that. And for communication barriers, I would kind of focus on psychological barriers. I already have kind of alluded on when we get triggered, right? Our communication drops down. And that's what I would say kind of becomes the barrier. And not even from the receiver end, but from the sender end as well. That if we carefully, as we already have talked about, and Julie talked about the biases, right? We do not take the time to overcome or at least be honest that I have this communication issue or a problem, and then you are communicating it to others and it's triggering others, but sometimes it's even coming from us as when we are triggered and we don't even realize that we are. And one of the things that really helps, and I teach my clients, is like about 5 love languages. I know that book is about couples kind of improving on their communication, and Julie talks about it, and the receiving end and the sender's end. So most of the time, the crux of that book is, or the program, we kind of learn how the other person becomes how the other person receives our communication, or in that language as love, kind of how they perceive that. Not how, if I like words of affirmations, and you might be just kind of showering your team with words of affirmations, right? But the person might just like quality time, and they just want to have a good lunch with you. Maybe a team building session is going to fill up the communication barrier. So I think, as we say that in the presentations, that when we are teaching to cover many different modes of learning, and I would say the same, that from a psychological point of view, that cover many modes of motivating and communicating with your team, so that you're covering all bases, that the receivers of all kinds are receiving your communication as you perceived it, as you intended to communicate.
Thanks for that, Gurpreet. That was really well done. Sylvia.
Well, I don't know what to add that hasn't already been stated or alluded to, but I guess for me, there's some sort of basic rules of communication that I like to recommend, and that is, it's better to over communicate than under communicate, because people, again, will make assumptions. So one of the barriers to poor communication would be to make sure that you're as clear and as open as you can be with your communication, which requires oftentimes moments of bravery or courage. You know, we talk about how difficult it is sometimes to speak up in a meeting, but if you don't speak up, it's difficult then to blame someone else for not giving you a chance to speak, or for no one paying attention to your opinion if you're not giving it. So there is some bravery that's involved, and that is very difficult, but you can sometimes find different ways around that. You know, sometimes face to face is difficult, sometimes group expressions, like expressions of your thoughts are difficult. So maybe it needs to be on paper, and maybe it needs to be directed in that way. I also feel like it's really important to understand that you know your triggers, but a lot of other people don't. So can we, with love and respect, assume, unless people are being directly mean, can we assume good intentions and then go and speak to that person if we've been triggered or offended? Nobody knows my triggers better than I do. I would tell you from like all of my years of experience with sharing who I am to people, 99.99% of people would have looked at me and said, seriously? I would never have guessed that's a trigger for you. They're personal. They're related to our past and to our experiences and to trauma and all kinds of things. Everyone's triggers are personal and for the most part unknown by even their closest family and friends, never mind their coworkers. So you are going to flip the switch on somebody. But from the person's point of view who's been triggered, can we recognize that most people do not want to do this? That we need to be open and have a conversation with people, maybe privately. The other side of it is that try and be as neutral and respectful in your communication, recognizing that you are going to offend somebody somewhere along the way. Just assume that it's going to happen and be self-aware enough to say, I am so, so sorry. Even if you think it's completely absurd that person is offended by that. It doesn't really matter what your judgment is. You've got to build a bridge. Communication needs to be about building bridges, not putting walls between you and other people. That doesn't work in a workplace where we need each other, and it doesn't work in a family. So these are just some basic rules that I have. Is like be brave, courageous, assume people's good intentions. And then when it goes a bit south, try and have a conversation so that you can build a bridge with that person. Over communicate instead of under communicate. And then the last thing I want to say is that the risk of getting it wrong, unless you ask questions for clarification, is very high. 70% of communication is the words we speak. 35% is our tone, or 37% is our tone. Sorry, 55% is body language and 38% is tone of voice. So when you put all of that together, the chances of us getting communication wrong on the basis of interpreting what we think someone's saying based on tone and body language, pretty high.
You're so correct.
The only way you know is if you ask questions, right? Like,
And I think, though, Sylvia, that is the biggest barrier for most people. And they will say to me, well, I don't know what to ask because I don't want to come up as being stereotyping or discriminating, or, I don't want to offend, so I don't ask questions. And I love that because that is so key when you can't read the other person's mind and they cannot correct you if you don't ask questions. So the process of asking questions is not about you. And one of the things that I teach is that precursor. I say, I'm going to ask you a question that will help me to understand what you mean better. Telling people what it is you want to do. Because if you don't, they can assume your question has a double meaning that it doesn't. So often, when we want to be responsible in our communication, when we go into responsible communication, is we're looking at these precursors. I want to have this conversation because I want you to speak up in meetings and communicate because It will allow others to hear your bright ideas and not just me, because some leaders like to take on that role. Oh, okay, just tell me what you have to say and I'll say it for you. No, everyone has their voice, and part of responsible communication as a leader is to encourage people to use their voice, because their tone may be very important and very different from yours. So giving them that room and encouraging them and coaching them to use their voice, but also teaching them to use precursor. Here is why it's important. Here is why I made this comment. Here is why I'm going to ask these questions. Here's what's coming to my mind when I heard you say that. Please clarify. And I think these simple little things can help to remove a lot of the communication barriers and the fears that people, because most of it is fear. Fear is what holds us back. Fear is what prevents us from breaking down those barriers so we can engage and dialogue with each other in a more impactful way. Where I'm scared I'm going to hurt that person. I'm scared they're going to be upset. I'm scared they're going to call me names. I'm scared I'm going to offend. Well, stop being scared and just be you. Be human, because humans are not perfect and may have good intentions. Part of responsible communication is having good intentions, and it also is about communicating without harm and cleaning up your mess. Saying, this wasn't my intention. That wasn't what I misspoke. It didn't come out the way I intended it to. Can we start over? Can we do it again? Can I express it in a different way so that my full meaning comes across? We have a responsibility to do that. And most times we hide behind fear and we don't get it done. So we are stuck with many of those communication barriers.
Can I add to that? Because I love the precursor piece. And then also, in addition to that, a response piece. So if you reach back to the person who just said something to you, and you can, if you need clarification, ask for, humbly say, can you clarify for me? Because I think you're saying this, but I don't want to misunderstand. So being able to do that is also very reassuring to the person you're communicating with, right? Is making sure that you're receiving the message right by repeating what they say. That's gonna repeating the point, right? You don't have to repeat everything they say, but repeating that point is going to help them know, oh, okay, she was listening to me, or oh, wait a minute, he didn't get my point, so I have to rephrase it so they understand. So having that, that dialogue back and forth, the precursor and then the response, I think you put those two together and you have this really dynamic situation where miscommunications or communication barriers begin to be broken down.
Absolutely. And paraphrasing sometimes get kicked to the side because it's been overly taught, but it's so important and impactful, because sometimes the act of paraphrasing tell the person, oh no, that's not what I said.
It's way over here, and I was talking about that.
Exactly. So this is what I actually mean, and I, meant to say. Let me do that again. Absolutely, guys. This was a good conversation. Let's wrap it up. Any last comments for this? Someone is struggling right now. They are not able to communicate with a boss, with a coworker, or even with an intimate partner. They feeling fearful. They're concerned. They're not getting the responses they want. They're not being heard. What is one thing you would say to them? We each get a chance. Yes.
I'll go first. Another psychological term, I guess, I can introduce. It's called Johari's windows. There are 4 different aspects to your consciousness, right? One is that's available to everyone, to you and other people. And one is available to you only, that you are only aware of what you think and what you feel and what your triggers are. And then there is one that is only access to other people and not you. And one is both are clueless, right? That there's just a true unconscious part of you. But the one that I wanted to brought the attention to you is the one that you are not aware of, and the other people are that you do. And I recently had come across this, that I have like done this, and one of my friends have experienced it. Used to be like, I cannot stand that that person does this, you know. And then one of my good friends, and we have a good trust, and she pointed out, it's like, you know what, you do the same. And I was like, do I? And that was like, and Joyce, you were talking about good intentions, right? And sometimes you just have those unconscious pieces that you're just not aware of it. And that has been actually very revolutionary for me, for my personal growth, to see like, oh, I can see it. You know, your unconscious biases that you just feel you're triggered when somebody else is doing it and unconsciously projected on you. So even good intentions sometimes do not communicate clearly that, hey, that person might not have like meant it, and don't even aware that they are doing this. So go up to them and tell them that this is how they felt, or this is how you felt. So that would be
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. Because we say life is a mirror, and when we reflect, when we see something in someone, it's because we have a similar. We only notice the things that
yep,
are reflective
absolutely.
of us in there. So I like that. Thanks. Who's up? Julie, Sylvia, and then Julie. Last thing for that person who's waiting. Oh, did she? Oh, I think she lost connection. Okay, Julie, you go ahead until she joins again. Here we are.
Yeah, I was going to say just that you go back to the awareness piece, right? I teach the ACT method, which is ACT, right? And the A is awareness. And it goes piggybacks right on what Gurpreet just said, right? You know, be aware of what the challenge is. You know, why is this barrier here? Because you can't really start to dissect it or break it down or change it if you don't know what it is. So that would be my biggest first step. Just become aware, really do that introspection, do that watch, listen, and become aware of what it is that is the problem, because you can't fix it if you don't know what it is.
True, 100%. Yes. Sylvia.
I'm here. Well, I'm gonna lean on some wisdom that my mother shared with me that has never led me wrong in communication relationships, and that is, she always said, "You're never wrong if you say thank you and sorry." Those two words will never be wrong, and they are bridge building words. So, and if we were to sort of look at what's above that, what's the bigger concept? It's really about, right? Just treating people as if they belong and matter, assuming that they feel the same about us. I'm like, but let's give, let's assume good intentions, and let's focus on the type of communication that allows us to have connections with people instead of disconnections, because we need each other in the workplace. We need each other in our families. People are practical. We're social creatures. And if we're constantly putting up barriers between us and other people, especially on the basis of assumptions, that's a pretty unhappy way to live. And it's a very
Yes.
unhappy way to work.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. I hope this show, thank you to my guests, Gurpreet, Sylvia, Julie. It's been great. And we've got to do this again. It was a beautiful conversation. And I look forward to you. Please leave your comments in the section below. We'll be going by and answering any questions you have on this topic. It is such an important topic for so many people. This is what's happening at work, and it was a pleasure hanging out with you today. Bye, ladies. Have a
Thank
good
you
one.
all.
Be well. Bye bye.
Thank you.